Welcome, 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 one and all, to yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both foreign and domestic, from the political to the cultural and the silly to the serious. We cover it all here. I'm glad to have you all here. Welcome to the show, Jenny Burns, Cernus. Always a pleasure as people flow on in. Just sit back, kick your feet up. We're going to have a great show for you tonight. So tonight we're going to be talking about Biden's airstrikes, the U.S. and U.K. joint airstrikes against targets in Yemen against the Houthis. Um, is this escalating the situation? Is it right that Biden is conducting these strikes? Will they even work? We've got some people here to discuss it. There are more coming, okay? I promise you. But for now, this is who we got. So we'll just start by getting your general opinion. Maybe people could you could tell people who you are and things like that. And then we'll just go from there. We'll start with Kevin Logan. It's been a minute. How you doing?
It has been a minute. Yes, hello there, everyone. I'm Kevin Logan, a socialist from the United Kingdom, and thus we are America's little cuck boy, also doing imperialism, which is nice. You can find me on Twitch, KF Logan 1875, if you wanted to. Yes, so in terms of Yemen, uh, I have a number of issues with the way in which the Biden administration has, and indeed my own government, have handled this situation, and then there's a kind of broader point about the way in which the West reacts to these things in general, which I'd like to make. Firstly, the the problems with the way in which we've just immediately gone to bombing one of the poorest countries in the world, a nation that has undergone frankly a genocide that's been partly funded and backed by Western powers, from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which has killed about 300,000 people before any of this even started. We've created the very conditions in which groups like the Houthis can develop, and then we get surprised when that fires back on us in the same way that we did when we created the power vacuum which created ISIS, the way that we created the power vacuum which created the Taliban. It's a repeated pattern of interventionism and then not having any kind of plan after that, which leads to negative outcomes in the future. And I feel this is just the same basic process being undergone yet again, for the millionth time. It's, I think, ethically dubious that we just bomb places as the first and foremost response that the West seems to have to all of these instances is just bomb places, as if that sorts the problem out, which it doesn't. It just radicalizes people. It creates more problems down the line. It won't fundamentally stop any of the issues, I think, that it purports to want to stop, and will create a breeding ground for more extreme reactions from the people of Yemen and indeed the people of the region, who see that the Western powers don't give a fuck about them and will bomb them the second it becomes convenient to do so. And then, yeah, there's the kind of broader point, I think. The West needs to become much more intelligent in the way it uses its force. It has a lot of power, both soft and hard power, and seems only now interested in just dropping bombs on civilian areas as an answer to basically every geopolitical problem. It just sees war from a distance because it's scared post Iraq of putting boots on the ground anywhere, to just want to bomb places. And I don't see that's a fruitful long term endeavour. Um, which I'd be interested to hear what everyone else's take on that is. But yeah, either way, to predict what some other people on the panel might have to say on this, the Houthis are trash, right? I'm just going to put that out there straight away. The Houthis are anti-Semitic, dangerous, slave owners. That's a thing these things are all true about the Houthis. So I'm not here to defend them. But what I will say is that none of the action being taken by both the Biden administration and the Conservative government here in the UK will do anything to stop those bad things about the Houthis. And it actually will lead to further support in Yemen for the Houthis, therefore further entrenching those terrible things about them.
Okay, well, quite the opening statement. Thank you for being here. We'll see how we go. We got the other side here. I was scrambling, gang. I was like, oh my God, no one else showed up. But no, they're here now. We're here. We're ready to go. But let's continue with the opening statements. Let's get through it. Will there be call-ins? Maybe. We'll see how it goes, Omar. I promise. Next up, we have Nonsmoker. Nonsmoker, thoughts?
Yeah. Twitch.tv/nonsmoker, non_smoker, resident, last remaining 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜 on the platform. Happy to be here. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty simple for me that there's very little precedent for military intervention being an effective means of quelling conflicts, particularly when it comes to U.S. military intervention against non-state actors in the 20th and 21st centuries, I should say. I think that this strategy has failed every single time it's been implemented. Oftentimes, it ends up in creating greater destabilization. And in the case of Yemen, I think it's very interesting that as much as there may be plenty of criticisms to go around for the Houthis and their methodology or their ideological composition or whatever, the idea that carrying out strikes on Yemen, which could potentially be detrimental for civilians who live there, is going to do anything other than embolden them. The notion that people don't get that connection is incredibly frustrating for me. I would think that one of the most important things for the Houthis, much like Hamas, is gaining international recognition as a legitimate group which wields legitimate authority and power, almost as if they're the legitimate government of Yemen. And for the Houthis, carrying out these strikes on commercial shipping vessels, although to us in America it might seem kind of illogical, to them seems like the perfect way to demonstrate their legitimacy, because they appear to be at this time the only group, or one of the only groups, willing to use military force to support the people in Gaza. So I think if you want to stop these strikes, you would have to do something to the Houthis that would be more consequential to them than the benefits of being internationally recognized as a legitimate power. And I don't think any amount of drone strikes on Yemen will deter the Houthis. I actually think trying to negotiate a peace settlement in the conflict in Gaza with Israel would do a lot more to quell these attacks than anything else. I don't think that's a simple solution, and I don't pretend to say that it's a matter of making one or two phone calls and then it's done with, but certainly we could do more than, nothing. And I think that route is ultimately a much better one for the world and would probably succeed in stopping these strikes on these shipping vessels, lead to less civilians dying, etc.
Okay, well, thank you for being here, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. Next up, I don't think you've been on my channel proper before. Perspective Philosophy. What do you have for us?
Hello. Really happy to be here. Yeah, I mean, I'm taking the position that it wasn't just simply that we should have struck the Houthis, but that it was necessary for us to have struck the Houthis, both the UK and the USA. The way I see it is that right now we're in the geopolitical tensions that are going on right now represent a new Cold War and a challenge to American hegemony. And although I'm not a fan of the way in which America has, let's say, perpetuated its power globally with the Iraq and Afghan wars, specifically, I don't think they were very well done. The alternative is to essentially lose American hegemony, and what you'll see is global destabilization and wars everywhere. People will start scrambling for power, and the power vacuum will lead to essentially a world war or small conflicts to the point in which it's basically a world war, but people aren't necessarily having one single unified conflict. So the way I see it is that the protection of global shipping, such that we can maintain our military supremacy and maintain NATO's military security for the foundation of, let's say, German industrialization, British industrialization, at a time in which we're having to ramp up and produce more and more ammunition, military equipment. Poland's put the largest order of military equipment in since the Second World War in terms of European supply. So what we really have is a very lukewarm Cold War in which we're talking about the total mobilization of pretty much the entire European population. I think that if we need to bomb anyone to make sure that war does not happen, or we can prevent that happening to the best of our ability, we should bomb the shit out of them. We should absolutely bomb the shit out of them. Very sorry that the Houthis... actually, I don't feel anything for the Houthis. Nothing. I do feel bad for the people of Yemen. And I do pity the Houthis, I suppose, in one respect, that they are misguided. But in the grand scheme of things, we need to essentially take away their military infrastructure, or rather their military power, which they've been provided, and we need to do so in the cheapest way possible. So one of the biggest problems that we're facing isn't necessarily that we're bombing the Houthis, it's the cost of bombing the Houthis and the ability to maintain global shipping at a reasonable rate such that we can allow for NATO to survive this test of its hegemony.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. We'll see how it goes. Last but certainly not least, someone who I do appreciate, because this was last minute, literally 5 minutes ago. I got a DM saying someone had an emergency, couldn't make it, right? And Artemis Fowl was willing to step up and fill in. So I really appreciate you, Artemis. Thank you. Go ahead. What you got for us?
Okay. So the Yemeni civil war started in 2014, where the Houthis rose up, started trying to overtake the legitimate government of Yemen, causing massive bloodshed and death. The Yemeni president in 2015 asked Saudi Arabia to help stop the evil Houthis that everybody agrees is shit. And Saudi Arabia did this by supporting them with bombing. Actually, Helen, your guy said you guys here.
Oh.
So if you want, I can tag out, but this is going to be I can do my opening statement.
Yeah, do your opening statement. And then
I'll bow out to Rashad so he can come over the top rope.
Yeah.
All right. So no, there was no genocide. Yemeni president, the official government of Yemen, asked Saudi Arabia to help them fight off the extremist Houthi terrorists, and that's why they were bombing them for fucking 8 years. There was no examples that they're going to give, because nobody did any research into this for why they were bombing them. Just because they were being bombed doesn't give them the right to fire at shipping lanes. They're being backed by Iran. That's where most of their equipment is coming from. The Houthi military is very large. It is a lot better armed than Hamas. It is a lot more organized than Hamas. It has a standing actual infrastructure. So it's not like ISIS. We can actually bomb them and get rid of them. Yes, when somebody starts firing missiles at shipping lanes, we shouldn't just wait for them and try to reach them with fucking diplomacy. You need to immediately stop them. The Houthis are an active shooter in a fucking school. You have to stop them immediately. Then you can decide whether or not there's like any further issues need to be done. Radar systems are not they're not plentiful. You can take them out. Once you take out their radar systems, they are blind. They can't fire their missiles accurately. It makes the shipping lanes safer. Shipping lanes are much more necessary than people think. Shipping lanes actually provide life-sustaining food and resources to very poor countries on the other side of Africa, because trying to go around the Cape of Good Hope would cause a massive amount of delay and is much more expensive. So this doesn't just impact fucking the capitalist societies that I know somebody's going to argue, but it actually impacts a lot more people, and especially poor countries. So I don't know why anybody's making these arguments that we shouldn't take out the Houthis, because the Houthis haven't provided anything useful. They are terrorists. They have been at war. They're implementing child soldiers. They don't bring anything useful to the conversation other than they're trying to kill innocent people, abduct them, and steal all their shit. They decided to respond with force against innocent people, we should respond in kind until they stop.
Okay, well, thank you again. Thank you for being willing. Rashad, hi.
Rashad, I'll bow out now since you don't need me.
Well, you'll always be needed in my heart. But thank you again.
Before I leave, Kevin Logan. Yep. 𝕵𝖎𝖙 was right.
Hello?
𝕵𝖎𝖙 was right.
About what?
𝕵𝖎𝖙.
Yeah, what about him?
He was right though. Don't worry
I have
about
no. Okay.
No, he's a cop.
Okay, I don't know who that is or what that.
Don't worry about it. It's
a grown man who pretends to be a bear on the internet.
Yeah.
That's all. You
I
need
just.
to know.
Exactly.
About this. I'm gonna be real.
All right, I'm out.
Bye.
See ya.
Rashad. Okay. Hi. First of all, I didn't think you were gonna make it. Thanks for making it.
No problem. Yeah, it was a very, very serious situation, but luck was on my side, and here I am. Thank you for having me.
Like, if someone died, go take care of that. Like, seriously, right? But
Oh no, no one's dead. Trust me. I would not. I'm sorry. You think? Do you think so low of me, Wick, that I would leave a corpse cooling?
I don't know you. I'm gonna be real. We've talked twice.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, I can assure you that I'm not that crazy or evil. I promise. No one's dead. I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. Houthis, Yemen, Biden strikes.
Mhm.
Opening thoughts, and then we'll get into it.
I think Joe Biden's doing a great job. I think that in lieu of what's going on in Ukraine, that's threatening the stability of Europe and the world. I mean, the last 2 world wars started in Europe, and it looks like Putin's putting Europe at risk of a third. I think right now, what's going on in Israel and Palestine and the Houthis' support of Palestine by blocking shipping lanes is just causing a little bit too much chaos in the world. I think that Biden striking them is what's best. It gives the U.S. time, energy, and resources and comfortability to focus on Ukraine and on China rather than trying to juggle 3 different conflicts, one being a potential conflict at the same time. I think that, the economic effects of the war in Ukraine, combined with the economic effects of what could happen if the Houthis were allowed to just run rampant and block up shipping lanes and drive up prices and make resources harder for people to access, I think that Biden striking them is good for the United States of America's geopolitical interests, is good for the interests of Egypt, and is good for the interests of the world at large. So that is my take.
Okay, and with that, okay, we'll open it up to discussion. If you have problems getting in, please let me see your hand. Don't be afraid to just kind of go and roll with it. If I tell you to shut up, please shut up, because that means either A, I can't hear you, or you're all talking at once, or B, I have a question for the panel. But with that, go ahead, open it up. Let's hear it.
I wanted to make a point about what Artemis Fowl said, but obviously they're not here. But I'll just sort of address it before we get going. Particularly, they were saying that we need to get rid of the Houthis. Now, that's not necessarily a bad idea. But what we're doing at the moment isn't going to get rid of the Houthis. It isn't going to make one fewer slave, one fewer child soldier, any less anti-Semitism. In fact, actually, it could make the situation significantly worse, because by bombing people, you create a breeding ground. You create the perfect recruiting tool for extremist organizations, as we saw with the bombing of Iraq, which created ISIS, various other parts of the world where we've intervened and made the situation significantly worse.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the alternative is when they're attacking global shipping. Like, what would you say that we should, because right now it's tit for tat strikes. So I'm just wondering, are you promoting boots on the ground, that another American invasion?
Well, no, I don't think that would be a better situation. It would, at least in some hypothetical world in which that did happen, that would at least potentially bring about the end of the Houthis, which is one of the things that people are talking about. But no, I don't think that would necessarily be the right approach to it. Ultimately, I think it's a matter of, if the Americans are really serious, giving proper naval not guidance, what's the word? Convoys around the Horn of Africa, something like that. I don't know exactly how that would work for the time being, and then engage in building of a civil society and a peaceful society in Yemen in a way that has not been done for the last decade at the very least. Like I say, the Western governments have literally financially backed and armed Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to kill 300,000 Yemenis, and ultimately to create the very conditions in which the likes of the Houthis can prosper.
What would you do a lot of arms sales?
$10 from Artemis Fowl to respond to you. And I like this dynamic where he pays me money to respond to you and you just talk. That's great. We're going to go with it as long as we can. $10 to say, I argued to get rid of their anti-ship radar. The U.S. is not bombing anything other than military installations. Unlike ISIS, they have actual bases and installations. No radar means no missiles hitting boats.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll wait and see if it works. But I mean, Joe Biden literally answered the other day when he said, "Is it getting rid of? Is it stopping them? No. Is it going to continue? Yes." Like, you're essentially doing the same thing that generals in the First World War did. You're sending people over the top to walk into machine gun fire 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, and hoping it eventually works. It doesn't. It doesn't work.
What would your alternative be? I'm assuming you might be suggesting a hearts and minds scenario where we build up Yemen and we repair the damage done by the civil war.
Yeah.
I think it would have to involve some level of physical force. I mean, an organization that chants death to America, death to Israel, curse upon the Jews, you're going to have to kill a few of them to get some kind of headway, you know?
I think you probably are, yes. That would involve, establishing an actual popular government in some part of Yemen, in a way that the current puppet government in Yemen, which controls like a quarter of the...
What if the Houthis are the ones that the Yemeni people want? But then what?
Yeah, and to be fair, like, I'm just wondering what mechanism you would use to do that, because if you install a puppet government, it's only going to give legitimacy to the idea that the United States is
No, I'm not sure.
dictating.
No, I'm saying the government, the current Yemeni government is a puppet government, is a Saudi puppet government. You need to actually have the building of civic society in...
Let's be frank, anything next to Saudi Arabia there is going to be a Saudi puppet government, unless you can say that you're going to change your geopolitical stance towards Saudi Arabia.
Well, I genuinely would, yeah. Actually, I would do that, yes, because Saudi Arabia are look, for all of the terrible shit you can say about the Houthis in terms of their brutality, their lack of following international law and human rights. You can say most of that shit about Saudi Arabia as well.
Oh, I agree.
And we're happy to. Well, exactly, yeah. So we would need to have a fundamental reassessment of the way in which we do this.
Yeah, except,
because what we've tried for the last.
And the bleeding power of OPEC, so like an OPEC plus.
Okay, yeah,
so,
okay. Well,
yeah,
I mean,
like,
look, I'm not saying it would be easy, but I'm saying there are ways in which
I'm saying it's fundamentally impossible. Like you're talking about essentially restructuring the global economy, taking away pushing out the petrochemical dollar and losing all America's power at a point in which it's facing perhaps its most the biggest trial that it might ever face. Like, it's like,
what if we just don't change the government? What if we just accept that some governments in the world, legitimate or illegitimate, non-state actors, just don't like us, and we don't like what they believe in, and we're never going to convince the people there otherwise? And we look at what's actually happening. What's actually happening is the attack of these international trade vessels. And purportedly, it's because of this ongoing fucking genocide in Gaza. Why don't we do something with one of our allies to negotiate an end to that, which will then get rid of this supposed motive?
That's the problem. That's the problem. Is if Hamas can do an October 7th attack, and then the Houthis say, well, our guys that are in the war aren't really winning right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to put global shipping at risk. That's all the more reason for Joe Biden, NATO, and the powers that be, which I support them for making this decision. That gives them all the more reason to say, you know what? We're not going to give a ceasefire. We're not going to give Hamas room to breathe. We're not going to have a redo of this. This is the last hurrah. This is their last shot. And since you have Iran and the Houthis playing games, what's the point of doing a ceasefire? Why not eradicate Hamas?
That's not gonna...
Occupy Gaza.
I don't think you're going to eradicate Hamas. It doesn't work like that. I don't think, unless you're going to kill everybody in that region.
One at a time. Let's let Rashad finish, then Nonsmoker, and then Kevin Logan, and that's the order we're going.
I'm going to say something extreme, but I'm going to put it out. It would take an occupation, a legitimate, clear-cut occupation of Gaza, and it would take a clear-cut, aggressive de-radicalization attempt, whether it's between the surrounding Arab nations and the West, but there's going to have to be some sort of ideological, not just physical death, because we know you can't kill the idea, but there will have to be an ideological death of Hamas, which will involve the occupation and de-radicalization of Gaza. Because if the Hamas is left ideologically alive, they will do another October 7th attack, and if the Houthis keep playing these games of involving civilians from Japan and India on these ships, We don't want the entire world being pissed off and getting involved with Yemen, Iran. We don't want that. We don't want this level of a spiral. So the best option we have now is to de-arm the Houthis by destroying the installations they're firing from, destroying Hamas both physically and ideologically, and that's as best as I can think of.
The risk there, like as much as like, look, I don't particularly like Hamas. I mean, I do pity the Palestinian people a great deal, though, and I think that the outcome would be horrific for both the soldiers occupying and a horrible urban war. And I mean, like we had Ireland, like Northern Ireland, and that was bad enough. I can't imagine Gaza being the built-up hellscape that it is being much better. So on both sides, you're going to have massive loss of life. You're probably going to end up not really de-radicalizing anyone, and you're also going to have a means of. And I think this is really what it comes down to. It's not really about eliminating Hamas. It's about eliminating Hamas as a threat to Israel and as a threat to global security. So like really what we need to think about is how much resources, and I hate to be I hate to be taking such a cold economics take here, because I don't like it. I'm a Catholic. I don't want people to die. I do pity everyone involved in this. But I think that what we'll have to look at is that this is a war upon resources and global shipping. And what if we end up engaging more resources than necessary, we're going to end up losing a much bigger war. And that's the real risk, I think, from this. So what we need to do is contain Iran.
Yeah. I just need to, I think, push back a little bit on what, apologies, I've forgotten your name, Rashad said.
Yes,
when you talk about having to occupy and essentially re-educate the populace of Gaza, to de-radicalize them, I would argue that given that the Israeli government has set itself absolutely on a campaign of genocide against the Gazan people, a campaign of destruction of even civilian infrastructure, I would argue if you're going to need de-radicalization and occupation, then those occupation forces need to go into Jerusalem and de-radicalize the Israeli government, which is the organization that is currently bombing the fuck out of basically everywhere in Gaza and is seeking to imperialistically take over from the river to the sea. That's literally what's taking place there. Now, I don't think the Houthis are doing what they're doing precisely because of Israel, but these things are connected. And again, it goes back to wanting to restructure the way in which we deal with that entire region in order to get better outcomes, which is a longer term project, I understand. I'm not suggesting that you're going to build these things overnight. But to the point that philosophy made, perspective philosophy made, in terms of the challenge to American geopolitical hegemony, why do I give a fuck about protecting American geopolitical hegemony? What interest have I in that particularly?
And like, imagine that America doesn't like America falls and Russia takes advantage of the situation, and we'll have a war in Europe.
No, America isn't going to fall.
It will, in terms of its ability to challenge en masse global events, like as an unfolding global war. So what we are currently relying upon American power in order to secure Europe. We have no capacity to secure our own borders. We would 100%.
Well, yes, we do. We are a nuclear power. We are literally. So we're just we're not going to invade.
We're going to resort to nuclear weapons.
No, I'm saying nuclear weapons because that's the nuclear armed states.
Pause. Yeah, maybe I missed it. Why are we talking about nuclear? Like, did my brain?
No, the idea that we can't protect our shore. No one's going to invade a nuclear armed nation. I'm not suggesting
why do you assume that?
I'll name one that has been invaded.
India and Pakistan are always fighting each other and invading each other.
Well, that's a border skirmish between two countries that used to be the same fucking country.
You're assuming that. You're assuming
they're not invading en masse. I think India isn't marching on Islamabad. It's a border skirmish.
You can't assume that we are not going to end up in a major conflict to protect the Baltic states. Like, there is no reason to assume that they can bank on us not implementing Article 5 and America not coming to support.
Okay, but if Iran is the opposite, if Iran is that, are you suggesting that Iran and Russia are going to team up to take on Estonia?
Iran and Russia are already teaming up. Iran, Russia, North Korea, and China are starting to show a power axis.
Wait, I'm missing
Yeah, and
something. Are you
it's going
saying that if
pathetically
Hold on.
badly in Ukraine?
I want to
yes.
pass the ball to Nonsmoker. Nonsmoker.
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, I feel a little ignored here, honestly. First of all, perspective philosophy. I'm just curious. I have a question for you, and I have a question for Rashad. First, for you, are you suggesting that, like, if I'm understanding you correctly, if we do not carry out strikes on Yemen, that Russia will invade Estonia? Don't you think that's like several
No, that would be
fucking massive
hyperbolic.
leaps in logic?
No, I think that would be hyperbolic. What I'm really saying is that if we don't carry out strikes in Yemen, then essentially our shipping lanes will be basically break down. We'll have to go around the Cape of Hope, which will put up shipping prices, which will damage our economies even further, especially things like the industrialization in Europe, or the industrial processes in Europe. So like German industrialization, like the orders that Poland are putting in for weapons, our capacity to produce shells for Ukraine. All of this will be ultimately harmed, and we'll have to lower aid packages to Ukraine, and we'll have to try and focus on our defense whilst not actually being able to maintain their defense. Ukraine's defenses will fall against Russia, and then we'll be bordering Russia directly, and we'll have a border between Ukraine and then the Baltic states, which the Russians have already suggested would lead to them crossing over with them occupying essentially but in between Poland and Romania, isn't it?
You honestly think they're gonna take on NATO?
I think that there's the possibility of them annexing northern Baltic states. It's not about them taking on NATO en masse. I think it's what they're relying upon is us fragmenting, which would happen if our economies fragment.
The Baltic countries are NATO countries, and so the Article 5 imperative
by name,
the US
but that's
and France
Article
and the
5
UK.
Article 5 doesn't guarantee it. Sorry.
Before we get too far down into that rabbit hole, right? I do want to bring it back to the Houthis, and I know Nonsmoker had another question for Rashad specifically, so I wanted to
hey Rashad, so quick thing. So I have a question, then like a tiny follow-up, but what is the historical precedent you're using for like occupying a foreign country and de-radicalizing it?
The fact that I don't really have much of an excuse me, my bad. I don't really have much of a pretext for it. There's no historical basis because this is the first time we've actually like dealt with, not the first time, but it's a unique situation that we haven't exactly experienced entirely before in every aspect. And what we have is an organization that is at least somewhat supported by the people. I know there's like a 50-50 split in Palestinian support for Hamas. I know a lot of them are unhappy with Hamas and how they're ruling the country, but a significant majority.
By the way, it was a lot lower before Israel started bombing the place. By the way,
well, a lot
support
of
for Hamas has increased since then.
Yeah, a lot of Palestinians, however, did support. I believe about 70% supported the October 7th attacks. So when you have a population that may not necessarily support the organization itself, but its ideals and actions, you have an eternal conflict where it's never going to stop. We have one side who's absolutely just deluded in terms of what it can accomplish geopolitically. We just attack Israel, attack Israel, attack Israel. That's not going to work. You can try to gain sympathy from your civilians dying now, but it's not going to work forever. At some point, people are going to realize that you're continuously causing this endless war. At some point, you're going to have to make a decision. But now that I think about it, I believe we did have an insanely radical country in World War II that we blew the fuck up twice. I believe it's Japan. So it's like, it's kind of funny that we're saying that there is no pretext to this. Even I said it, but I was wrong. We've done it before. I don't know. We've never tried it with radical Islam, but we're going to have to make an attempt because we can't keep doing this. I'm sorry. This October 7th shit over and over again. Like, we can't keep having this back and forth. So there has to be some sort of de-radicalization effort because you cannot kill Hamas physically.
So maybe if we had an Israeli government that didn't literally come out and say that there is no path to a two-state solution, literally putting a roadblock between the Palestinian people having their freedom and the current state of affairs that we have, maybe then we might be able to get around the table and negotiate rather than.
Well, what do you think a Palestinian state would? What do you think an independent Palestinian state would do if we just gave one right now? Like if we just said, you know what? West Bank.
No, I'm not suggesting. No, given the fact that there's literally virtually no buildings left undamaged in Gaza right now, realistically, there's no chance of that happening right now. But again, it's a long-term plan. But you'd need to rebuild these places, stop Israel from bombing the shit out of them, allow them actual access between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, so it's not an open-air prison which people want to escape from, and foster, let's say, less extreme Israeli governments that don't want to just murder Palestinians. And let's be honest, that is what's taking place there. Deliberately, we've literally seen.
I disagree with the whole murder thing, but go on.
Okay, did you see the guy with the white flag who was literally murdered on camera? He had a white flag and he was shot dead by an Israeli gunman.
Yes, these things happen in war. Like chaos, bullshit, war crimes, all these things happen in war.
Hold on. They think the white flag was exactly.
Would any of this happen if the October 7th attacks didn't occur?
I mean, there were attacks on civilians by Israel for years before that.
Hey, one at a time.
War crimes.
Non-smoker, you had a thought, and then Rashad can respond because there's something back for. Go ahead.
Yeah, this might get confusing because I had a follow up to his answer to my other question.
We get to the follow up in a minute, but let's go down this road first, right? I'm curious where this is going, if anywhere. You had a response to him just now?
No. Oh, yeah. I mean, there have been deaths of civilians in Gaza and both Palestinian territories for years and years and years before October 7th. It's not like the only reason that there's like a conflict going on is because of October 7th. To act like that is kind of denying this long history that the Palestinian people have felt like subjugated, totally cut off from resources because of the blockade. I mean, there's violence in that region because the land is disputed, and there's an inability on both sides to negotiate any kind of like meaningful two-state compromise. And I think a lot of the blame can go to Israel because in many ways they're like a legitimate government with connections to the West. They are recognized by, several international bodies as like a real, power player and someone who could potentially broker peace versus Hamas, which is largely viewed as a non-state actor, even though, they're technically democratically elected, but they stopped elections after their, them acquiring power. So I think a lot of the blame can go on Israel because they're in the position of power. To deny that is strange.
Well, can I just have a follow-up question, just essentially to both you and Kevin? So first with you, just in terms of the Israel being more to blame, I mean, to be fair, I think that both Israel and Palestine are absolutely disgusting states. I really dislike them both. I think that obviously the history is very complicated, and it's not something that, unless we're really going to engage in the nuances of who owns what and why, and whether these borders were drawn up legitimately, whether the water supplies were considered, where the sort of nuances that would lead people to perhaps want to fight, and also the ideological differences, the influences of geopolitical actors such as Iran, and also the actors that are around them that used to egg them on more and more, especially like Egypt used to egg them on more and more to attack Israel, and who's been funding them. And then there's just this sort of psychological coping mechanism of this martyr mentality that I think has become like ingrained in the people as well. And I don't know why we're blaming Israel alone. It seems like both actors have engaged horrifically, terribly, war crimes on both sides for, I don't know, like since way before we were all born. And it's a horrific scenario. So I don't know why we're blaming Israel more, just because it has a more legitimate, essentially more legitimate government setup, when Israel's also been the one that's in many ways because of really American geopolitical interests, tried to limit direct conflict. I mean, Israel suggested long before this that it wanted to invade, right? That it always thought that it was going to go in, and instead it took a bastion mentality, a siege mentality, and essentially built a big wall. Unfortunately, they jumped over the wall, they flew over the wall. So like, you're in a situation where I don't know what you really expect to be done here, other than the fact that bombs are dropping, like they've got rockets flying at them constantly.
You want to remind everyone we are talking about the Houthis today. I know I know they're connected, but I just want to remind everyone that's the topic. But continue.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just wondering why we're blaming Israel more. And then with Kevin's, I just want to say, like, as well, okay, I get that you have this idea of this, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100-year plan in the region, but that just sounds like ideological utopianism. Like, I don't, like, unless you've got some actual concrete...
It's utopian to rebuild houses and allow people to live in them.
Well, no, you can rebuild houses, but when you're talking about
Yeah.
like essentially producing a two-state solution, which leads to the de-radicalization of a population which has been
Right, but
fighting
you have
for
to have
100
like
years.
when
Yeah,
I
I think
say
that's
it's a
kind of
long-term
utopian,
plan, I
yeah.
mean you need to actually rebuild the places so people can go and live in them. That's what I
Well,
mean.
let's
Like,
let's say we
you can't do
let's
that
say we,
overnight. But yeah.
But
well,
even
let's say we do
look at
that.
the aid that has already been going in. Like, sorry,
No, you're good. You're good.
look at the
Yeah,
aid that was
but
already
that's the
going in
point
and
you were
it's
making
used.
about
And
why I blame Israel more. I mean, I don't like to do the utilitarian thing, but if you look at the number of Israelis that have been killed by Palestinians and vice versa, pretty lopsided. The
I
number
mean,
of
is that the logic
Palestinians
that the Houthis are using? Or
5,250.
is that what the Houthis? I mean, like, is that? I guess that's what the logic the Houthis are using. I mean, it's not like a lack of trying on the hand of Hamas. I mean, Hamas fires rockets all the time. They're so goddamn bold. They uploaded a video taking water pipes and just said, "Look at us taking important resources for the people as we use them as weapons to blow up people in Israel." I mean,
Okay, but I mean,
it's not like Hamas is
Israeli
trying.
soldiers have been literally fucking dancing on let's say,
Okay, I'm going to throw a
piles of
flag
rubble
on the
at
play
people's
here.
houses. That's
I
Yeah,
understand
yeah,
that these things
yeah,
are
we got it.
connected. Israel and Hamas are
TOS.
connected,
Yeah.
but I am absolutely going to go back to the Houthis and the Biden and American strikes because we
you're
can't.
so topic cocked.
It's impossible to prevent bleed over entirely because they are connected. But yeah, I want to really just. I don't want this to turn into Israel versus Palestine entirely. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Please?
I mean, there's a perfect connection, really, if you look at it like this. Like in the same sense that I think that it was just being made. Like essentially, they took water pipes and they were using them as weapons, right? Look at the same thing with the Houthis, right? Who are disrupting international shipping, despite that being the main way in which the Yemeni people actually receive international aid. Like these organizations are bad actors in the region, and of course we should pity the people. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I don't think there is a way to actually overcome this than to essentially take away that opportunities to attack.
I think you mentioned this earlier, or someone mentioned this earlier, the idea of it's not just European nations that receive goods this way, and it's poorer nations in West Africa, etc. And that's undoubtedly true. But do you think that America and Britain are acting for the good of those nations in West Africa and for the people of Yemen, or for their own geopolitical interests?
It benefits everyone, does it not?
No, that's not the question I asked. Why do you? I'm asking about why the intent behind it. Do you think the American government and the British government are acting for the benefit of the people of Yemen or the people of West Africa, or are they basically saying we want to keep prices down in Europe and therefore fuck it if we kill some Yemeni civilians?
It doesn't matter. It literally does not matter.
I would argue
matters-
on a
what matters
moral
is-
level it definitely does.
Yeah, you can't take the
At a
moral
certain point in
position that you're
time-
helping West Africa. Then you're not doing it to help West Africa or anywhere else in the world. You're doing it to, secure your own interests, which is exactly what we're doing. And we're doing it, in my view, anyway. And not to keep going back to the Palestine thing, we're doing it to circumvent finding a solution there. And this is obviously happening as a result of that. It's a purported motive, according to the Houthis. They're trying
that's
to.
like what it is Iran seizing a geopolitical event for its own advantage, right? Like that's what what we're seeing is Iran expanding its power outward. It's been developing the resources and the means in order to engage this way for a long time. This isn't something like, now the Houthis, who are incredibly well armed, are just disgusted overnight and somehow just managed to, they've been trained, they've been given resources. This is not something that is just, we're just going to do it all, out of the
I
passion.
agree. They're supported. No, I agree. The Houthis are definitely supported by Iran in some capacity. But to act like they have no agenda on their own and that they're just a puppet of Iran is kind of minimizing. First of all, it shows a total disregard for anything that's gone on in Yemen and any of the history in Yemen and what has enabled the Houthis to gain any sort of foothold or power there at all. And B, it's kind of ignoring the reality of the situation that the Houthis, much like Hezbollah and Hamas, want to be seen as legitimate. They have their own motive here of wanting to be recognized as, a force to be reckoned with. So, I mean, are they just, these? I don't think they're just these mindless drones of the Iranian government. I think they have their own motives here. They're taking action for their own reasons.
No, but
I don't think the Houthis are doing this to stop anything to do with the Palestinian people. I think that's an excuse they're using. I think Also, I don't think they're necessarily just puppets of Iran. I think they've got their own strategic interests involved in this, and I think them sort of piggybacking on the Palestinian people's issues and pretending like that's the only reason they're doing this is actually a pretty gross betrayal of the Palestinian people. I think that's a fair thing for them to do.
Yeah, I want to pass it to Rashad. He's been trying to get in. I know he had his hand up. Go ahead, Rashad.
Yeah. I mean, back to what you guys were saying about, why is America doing this? It honestly does not matter. At the end of the day, the people need resources. They need their goods. They need their shipping, and they're going to get it as long as we keep the Houthis from being able to clog up these shipping lanes. Whether or not it's being done from a place of pure benevolence really doesn't matter. I mean, it's like if you're being bullied at school and some kid steps in because he wants a good fight from your bully. At the end of the day, he saved your ass. Like, you still got saved. Doesn't matter if he just wanted to fight or not. You got saved.
But in this instance, you being bullied is slightly more expensive shipping. Like, I don't think that's worth. I don't think that's a fair thing to kill people over.
So you think that's the only? Hold on a second. It's not just slightly. You said want to let him go?
Yeah, let Rashad take it. Rashad, I would say let Rashad take it. Go ahead.
I mean, it's not just it's more expensive shipping. It's people not getting their goods on time. It's innocent civilians moving these ships being targeted by basically fucking, I mean, comparably pirates. I mean, people's lives are being put at risk as a result of these attacks, and it emboldens Iran to start wilding out. What if the Houthis strike a ship of a NATO nation? What if they get upset? What if they go over? But we don't want to see how far things could go. Right? They even attacked one of our ships. Mm-hmm. We don't want to just test we don't want to give the Houthis the ability to dictate the course of like world history. They're crazy. I mean, like, what are we doing?
I agree that the Houthis are bad people. I just don't think this stops them particularly.
I don't think this means they're going to dictate the course of world fucking history. I mean, that's like a little bit dramatic, don't you think? I think them attempting to assert their own agenda, which, look, just to go back to what Kevin was saying before about how, they're not necessarily doing this to help the Palestinians. I think there's a few motives the Houthis might have here, one of which is, they're probably trying to get revenge for some of the sanctions against them. Like, well, you won't allow us to have access to trade, so we're not going to allow you to have access to trade. I think that's one idea behind this. But two, another one is I think the Houthis are banking on the fact that this struggle in Gaza will end with a two-state solution, and they'll be on good terms with the new Palestinian state. And they'll be part of, this united Arab, tighter Arab coalition that's anti-West and to a greater extent, anti-Israel.
They're playing a silly game if that's the case then, because a lot of the Arab nations have turned their backs on the Palestinian people.
I think
literally Egypt closing the border to Palestinian people is a fucking
no, totally.
disgrace.
I think that's what they're banking on, the fact that they'll be seen as one of the only countries who stood with Palestine and actually offered military assistance.
By who? By what countries? That
by matter? a new Palestinian state, which I think they're banking on will form at the end of this.
I'm sorry to say this, but who cares about Palestinian power?
I think they look at the power struggle in that region like one in which they're attempting to form an axis of resistance, which would include Lebanon, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the new Palestinian state, possibly with Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen and Iran.
Can I ask a question to perspective philosophy? When you ask a question like who cares about Palestinian power, are you a supporter, generally speaking, of self-determination and democracy?
Oh yeah, of course. I don't mean in the sense like who cares about Palestinian power in terms of like their actual capacity to live and lead their own lives. What I'm talking about is in terms of geopolitical influence. Like, as in, like, do you think they're doing it in order to get on favor with Palestine or Iran? In terms of the big actors in the region, like, come on, why would we say it's Palestine?
I don't think they're doing it for the people of Palestine. Like I said, and they've got their own interests, and of course, like you say, I don't think they're just puppets of Iran, but they are certainly being influenced.
Yeah, I don't think they're just. Yeah, exactly. It's not like they're just puppets of Iran. That's fair enough. But what we can say is that the person who writes the check essentially has a considerable amount of power over you and influence over you, don't they? And what we're saying is that this is a very convenient time for all of this to kick off, right? In terms of like, this is like what we'll have is an incredibly vicious land war in Europe, which is very resource intensive. We have the tensions with Taiwan, and we have this kicking off in the Middle East. What we're seeing is all of NATO's borders essentially being pressed That's what we're saying. So, like, what we're saying
Taiwan
is
isn't NATO. What are you talking about?
what?
No, but
Yeah, no,
America
but
has
influence, sphere of
an
influence
unofficial
means-
red line where if China were to go in militarily,
Yeah, but that's America. That's America. That's
America
not
is
NATO.
part of NATO.
America's geopolitical interests.
America
which
is
NATO.
no. Can we just say apologies, 𝕬𝖎𝖏 here, but America is not NATO. There are lots of other
part of
nations, including
NATO.
2 other nuclear
If
powered
If
nations.
America leaves NATO, I will actually cry. Like, are you like NATO, right? America is NATO. We're along for the ride unless we pull our fingers out. That's how it is right now. We right now are legitimately freeloading off the United States. We like, I don't know how you like look at this, right? Like in Britain, right? Like I fuck the Tories, right? Like, let's just say this. I hate the fucking Tories, and I think they've destroyed our capacity to actually fight a war. But we're talking about cutting our military now to 75,000 men. There are more US Marines alone than they are in our entire military. Like we have,
Yeah.
we wouldn't.
America is basically
our
bankrupted
generals
itself, building
have
a
said-
ridiculously large military.
It's not
Yes,
bankrupt.
that
It's the
is
richest
true.
country in the world. What are you talking about? Like where?
You're
Where?
$32 trillion in debt. You're
Because of
never paying that money back.
No. They run a
doing
deficit
You're
great.
never
economy.
paying that money back. It's
It
gone.
We are
doesn't matter
doing
because
amazing.
it's about leveraging American bonds. They form a certain. What we do is we buy them as the reserve currency. They can export their inflation onto us. It's a geopolitical relationship where we can get rich, they can get rich, but they control their wealth. Essentially comes from the petrochemical dollar and having this capacity to export their inflation. So like, it's not like, oh, they're a poor. No, America's rich as fuck. Like America's
No, I'm not
truly
saying
rich
no.
as
I
fuck.
didn't say they were poor. I didn't say they were poor. I
Said
said
they're
they were running.
bankrupt.
I mean, even
yeah,
still,
they're running
bankrupt.
at a massive deficit. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
but like,
Americans
that's not
Eventually,
how
will
economics
cripple
work.
them.
That's not how
They're able
economics
to.
work. You're looking at it
they're
from like
able-
classical economics. That's not how economics work. You can run a massive deficit. What happens? You've got to think about how deficits are balanced in relation to income. So the price of your bonds, your currency, and essentially the inflation and inflation against the rest of the market. And America has a lot of debt and is able to.
Okay,
The
so I
fact
should-
that America can have, let's say, write
so
off
I should,
$2 trillion
I should
in
give
debt.
A fuck. I
Like,
should give a fuck about them bombing the people of Yemen on the basis that they need to keep up their political hegemony so that they don't go bankrupt.
American political hegemony has done Europe massive favors. Look at how much equipment, intelligence, weaponry we've been able to send to Ukraine and help them hold down their line. I mean, the
okay,
American-
but I mean also the many dictators they've supported in Europe as well. The people of Spain and Portugal might not like the fact that they upheld fascist dictatorships in those countries as well.
I mean,
it's not an absolutely
we did-
clean record here.
We're
We
talking
did
about
all-
immediate threats to the safety and existence of NATO countries. Whatever's going on in Spain and Portugal, I admit I don't know much about it, but what's going on in Ukraine has been a massive threat to
No,
NATO.
I'm not.
massive
No,
to
again, I'm
Europe.
not suggesting
And
it's
American-
all bad either.
The American
I'm saying
hegemony, the American military.
the idea that America is some universal good in Europe is just not fucking true.
I
Obviously.
never said it was a universal good. I don't think anyone's saying it's a universal good. We're just saying
I think-
America is NATO.
Okay.
Like,
I kind of
want
agree
to
with
pass it to.
I'm not
I
arguing
can see
benevolence. I'm not
Look,
arguing
just real quick,
benevolence. I'm arguing
real quick. I can see Nonsmoker's head's about to explode here. We're hitting on all his, We're pushing all his buttons with the Ukraine stuff, with the
Someone
NATO
said
stuff.
Ukraine.
But go on. I want to give you a chance to jump in.
Actually, I agree a little bit, I think, with perspective philosophy sort of about NATO. I mean, NATO's teeth are made possible by the United States. I mean, it's like it's a military alliance in name, but it's really America and then all these other countries that benefit from us having a huge military investment in their protection. If it's about America's interests. That's how it's always been since its formation. But, in terms of what perspective philosophy is saying, and I think I'm getting the argument a little more clearly now, that you happen to think that, like, if we don't do something about the strikes on these shipping vessels, it'll threaten our economic integrity, America's economic integrity, which will eventually lead to our breakdown due to the death of our hegemony. And then eventually, that'll lead to Europe being more prone to invasion from Russia and blah, 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 because NATO will be weakened in some way because we're weaker.
Not
that
exactly.
the argument?
Not exactly. I think that America will be weaker, but I think America can sustain itself a lot better than us in terms of it's essentially energy secure, it's food secure. In terms of its relations to other countries and shipping, it's pretty okay. And also it has the largest military in the world to back it up. What I'm actually really concerned with is with our need to now have a military buildup. America is now looking towards us in order to essentially secure NATO. NATO's not going to survive unless Europe pulls its finger out. So we actually need to build up.
Okay, I know. I think I know where you're going with that, but like, if we're saying that they're the pipe, they're calling the tune, then they have to pay the fucking piper, don't they? If they want to be the big
they're talking about leaving
hegemon,
yeah, they're talking about leaving.
Well, if they don't want to be the big,
the Baltic states are gone. If
then they're not going to play. Then okay,
we can't hold the Baltic states without the United States. Like that's.
I'm not suggesting we can, but again, if America want to play big sheriff, they have to pay. They have to cough up the money.
We'll be lucky if we can stop them at Poland.
Okay. It is the top of the hour, and I did tell my super chatters that I would read their super chats at the top of the hour. There's some questions for you, gang, and we'll get to them. But let me read these super chats. And gang, if you like this content, please support the channel with super chats. I'll read them on stream, etc., and I'll ask the panel things. Like button, subscribe button, follow button, all that good shit. Okay, here we go. So $5 from Artemis Fowl to ask Kevin Logan, how would we nation build in Yemen without invading it, killing hundreds of thousands of people and trillions of dollars investing? $20 from Artemis Fowl. Let me get to him, and then we can get.
No, because I'll fucking forget. I'll just say there would need to be some sort of multinational peacekeeping force. I don't think you could have a unilateral American force step in there because that would be seen as absolutely imperialism. So they wouldn't work.
Okay. $20 from Artemis Fowl. Logan, why can the U.S. nation build Yemen by invading it and killing hundreds of thousands in the process, change its values and occupy it because Houthis are evil, but you reject Israel doing it to Hamas in Gaza?
I didn't say you have to do that. Okay, whatever. Like, keep giving money, I guess. Yeah.
$10 from Running Joke. Considering there are still 8 American hostages held by Hamas, shouldn't their rescue and release be a higher priority for Biden than protecting shipping lanes and attacking the Houthis? This is to the other side now.
I don't think that these are mutually exclusive. I don't think that you can say that 8 people... I don't think you understand the economic outcome of a disruption in shipping, which is a massive disruption in shipping and increasing costs. Many more people will die from the increase in costs, increase in energy, and also increase in food and even medicines. So there's that, and also we're talking about political stability in and of itself. We can't just look towards 8 people being the bedrock of the state. They are valuable, they do matter, and so do the Palestinian people, and so the Israelis. But it's a very tense and difficult geopolitical situation that we can't just make about 8 people.
Okay, well, that's it for now for the super chats. But I guess I'll just ask the panel this question, right? Just to kind of recenter this thing. I know we've gotten a lot of places, right? For those of you who are against these strikes, what would you have America do in lieu of striking the Houthis, right? Like, Houthis attacking civilian vessels, right? Regardless of why. What should America and its allies do?
Well, firstly, I mean, what you could do is protect shipping in that area with the naval forces. America has
isn't that what they are doing?
The largest navy in the world. Well, I think to a degree they are doing that, yeah. You essentially give a convoy system around the Horn of Africa.
How much do you think it costs for one single missile interceptor?
I don't give a fuck.
A lot of money.
I'm not the fucking US Treasury Department. I don't care.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering how we're going to protect all global shipping if we just start firing very expensive missiles.
Who's saying that's happening? Where else is there this kind of bottleneck that would need to be protected?
But he talked this is why the UK is right now just developed laser tech. We're trying to reduce costs of taking down cheap missiles and drones. Right, the problem is that the missile interception is much more expensive than the weapons they're using. They will essentially win, not a war of attrition. That's a bit more of an exaggeration, but they will increase costs massively upon us. So, what we're seeing is our military being depleted. You can't just expect the United States to just constantly write a blank check. Don't worry, we'll just spend absolutely millions on missile interceptors on shitty cheap drones. Don't worry.
Oh no, because again, that would be a short-term solution, and then the long-term solution you would implement was what I said, was trying to actually foster a stable situation in these places, rather than, like I say, what we have been doing, which
Well, you
is
said
arming
yourself it could take 30,
regional
40...
actors. No, you said 30, 40, 50, 100 years. I didn't fucking say. I didn't put.
No,
a
but you
number
said
on it.
that this would be a long term. This would be a
It would be a
long-term
longer
goal,
term.
and it
It
would
would be a
not
longer
happen
term solution.
overnight,
Yeah.
and it would take many years.
Yes, it would. Yeah. So,
Well, I
mean,
have a different
is
solution.
America's naval power going to decrease so rapidly in the next 20
I think
years?
you underestimate the cost of just having a convoy constantly try and shoot missiles out the sky.
I think Kevin's idea is bad. I have a better solution. I would immediately negotiate a solution with the Gaza conflict by threatening to withdraw all military aid from Israel unless they can negotiate a two-state solution within the next year. And then I would subsequently get in touch with the Houthis and offer to lift sanctions in return for the strike stopping.
I mean, the first part I actually think is fairly reasonable. I do think, and I've said this numerous times as well, I think America needs to pull the reins on Israel. I think clearly I think that, it might be just for the Israelis to try and, hold Hamas to account in one respect, but I think mercy should season justice, and I think that we need to look at this, that there's many thousands of people who are going to die otherwise, and I think that in general, just the human cost alone should inspire the United States to do something about this. But I don't think relieving sanctions on the Houthis will help. I think relieving sanctions on the Houthis probably made it worse, since that actually happened prior. Like, didn't Biden actually relieve sanctions on the Houthis prior to this actually?
Yeah, in 2021, he
unfolding?
removed them from the terrorist watch list. So it made it easier to get goods, services, etc.
Yeah, they're not
easier to get in things. So
they're not
that was reversed though recently. I think last
right.
week
It's the
he put them back
special
on.
terrorist designation.
Yeah.
So they're specially designated now, but there were still sanctions against the Houthis. And I think, just not to pull us all over the map, I hate to do this. I do this every time I'm in a debate, but just for another case of precedence, it's like if you look at North Korea, right? A lot of what emboldens the North Koreans is sanctions and the devastation and the devastating impact it's had on the people there. Groups like the Houthis, Hamas, like they derive their support from people who are angry and fed up. And it's funny because we don't like this whole idea of this axis of resistance forming. It's threatening to our interests, and all of that I can perfectly understand, but we never seem to consider the fact that we're doing things. In fact, much of what we've done in the Middle East has resulted in this axis of resistance forming. So I think continuing to carry out military strikes is not at all a feasible
Before you go,
solution.
I don't think that's a fair analogy, given that North Korea has the second largest.
Don't let him bait you into this.
Don't
let him bait you into this. Before we get into that, we can if we want, but I did want to give Rashad here a chance to respond to everything that's been said. He hasn't gotten a chance yet. What do you think of the suggestions given so far? Good, bad, indifferent? What are your thoughts here?
I don't think that threatening to withdraw support from Israel if they don't come up with a ceasefire within the year is realistic. I think that we have to take into account the ideology of the people we're dealing with, both in Israel and in Palestine. But I would argue that the radical ideology is a lot stronger within Palestine. I don't think that basically rewarding Hamas for what they did on October 7th by saying, hey, look, we'll give you your two-state solution in exchange for what you basically caused yourself. And I think that it would embolden them. I think,
but Hamas wouldn't be the nation, would it? Palestine would be the nation.
Oh, so you're not giving
Hamas a nation.
Oh, so
Hamas
the people
would have to be removed from the situation. Yeah.
How do you remove Hamas?
How would you remove Hamas?
I'm saying from the governance of the place. I'm not saying you can just get rid of them from society. I mean, there are fucking terrorists in America.
What if this? Let's just take a hypothetical. What if the society really aligns themselves with what Hamas believes? What if they really like Hamas's ideology? Then what?
You think that's actually true, though? Do you think that's true of Palestinian people?
Yeah, I think it's true.
I think
right. And why do you think they've been driven into this situation? You think they're naturally just terrorist lovers, or what?
I think
think
there's
it's
more
something
than-
innate within Arabs.
So are you
Oh,
about to argue that this entire situation is purely a creation of Israel?
No, it's not a creation of Israel. It's a creation.
I would never
of
argue
a
that
There's a
number of
reason. There's a reason that
socio-political
ideology
factors.
exists.
Well, you got to
There's
let
a reason that
Rashad
exists.
finish though. So.
I would never argue that a group of people are biologically predisposed to any sort of behavior. However, the conditions of Palestinians have found themselves under did not just come up in a vacuum. This is not Jim Crow. This is a literal conflict between these two groups of people that has been going on since the 1940s. And if you look at the majority of initiations in the conflict, it is not Israel just wilding out. Unfortunately,
But it started as a settler colonial project.
It is a
That's where it
settler
started.
colonial project made up of like 30 to 40% Mizrahi Jews who are like indigenous to the Middle East.
That's not. I mean, let's be honest. That's not where it started. It started with the World War I and the Ottoman Empire and Britain essentially creating
the Zionist
pact.
project
Settler
began in the
colonial
1880s. It's been gone for a while. The whole idea was it during the Russian pogroms, right? Back in the 1880s when they were like literally killing Jews. And again, the Holocaust was not the only mass killing of Jews in Europe. That was just the kind of climax, if you will. This had been going on for over almost a century at that point, right? So the Zionist project was to find a homeland. Look, there's a lot, okay? We don't have the time, but just it's hideously complex. That's all I'm going to say.
My point being is we've arrived. We're here. Israel exists. It is a state. And the objective history is the majority of the extreme escalations and conflict have been initiated by either A, Palestinians, or B, their Arab partners. This is a fact.
Know, I wouldn't go that far. I'd say that both sides have horrific amounts of blood on their hands. I think it's terrible. I mean, my grandfather was there during the 1940s as a UN peacekeeper, and he saw firsthand the Jews, the Israelis, commit some horrific war crimes. So it's not like, it's one side. It is absolutely fucking horrible, and both sides are committing war crimes and have committed war crimes. And I don't think that we're gonna. And I do think a two-state solution is probably the best. I just don't know how we're gonna resolve it. I hate to say this, but I don't think that there is an easy resolution to this. And I don't think we can say
you can't solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on my panel. What are you doing? Okay, anyway, go on.
Well, exactly, right? It's obviously we'll have to be a bit humble in the sense that obviously we can call out certain actors, we can say certain things should or should not be done. We'll have to take a step back and see that this is a living history that has been going on for, well, I mean, some of it really was since the time of Hadrian. So, when we look at the scale of what we're talking about, well, I think that really what he's saying is that we need to look at the here and now. I don't necessarily agree with your solution, to be honest. I think that essentially invading an ideological shift, I don't think that's going to work. I think that the only way that you're going to do that is essentially like a sort of metaphysical genocide of the people, which is essentially re-education, which means we're going to have to behave like China, ironically. So I don't really think any of that's necessarily going to work. But what I do think is that we're in a situation here, which is we're going to have to let this essentially play out. And in the meantime, try to foster peace, try and increase dialogue, but also remind ourselves that this is essentially a Cold War.
Right.
Okay, but I mean, it's not America and Britain aren't just watching it play out. We're actively supporting one side in this, i.e.
I agree. I did actually agree with what's your name again? It's sorry, I'm terrible with names. It's the tanky guy. Non-smoker. I think I did agree with non-smoker in the sense that I do think we need to pull the reins on Israel. Because I think they're emotionally invested. I also think they need to look to that people and be able to say, look, we're trying our best to protect you. And I think that us essentially putting some roadblocks there and going, maybe we need to calm things down. You've hit them. You've done a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Now let's try
it's when you have a kind of proxy country situation with a superpower behind it that it becomes difficult to address the problem. So, for instance, the USSR did this with basically all of Eastern Europe. It didn't really matter what happened in Hungary. The West couldn't do anything about it because they had Big Daddy Russia behind them. So that's the end of that. In the same way with North Korea mentioned earlier, China's behind them. So there's nothing you're going to do. You're going to invade them and take up to the border of China? No, that's not going to happen. And the same is true with Israel. Until America, as the kind of superpower backer of Israel, does anything about this, nothing can change.
At the same time, we need to recognize that. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I understand, right? Like, so I want to. I know I keep doing this. I want to get back to the strikes, please. So again, there's been a lot of to-do about that, how this won't stop them. I don't know if that's true, right? Like, and I don't know if we need to fully stop them. Like, if we can degrade their ability to accurately attack or effectively attack ships, even if it's down from, okay, before we struck, they could attack 10 ships a month. Now, since we strike, they can only attack 2. I take that bet, right? I take that.
Okay, but
I take that win, right?
Okay, but what about the fact that the potential for radicalizing the Yemeni people? How many potential new Houthi recruits are acceptable per ship
at
saved?
This point? Since they are recruiting, according to some organizations, over 10,000 child soldiers, I don't think what we're doing is having the radicalization effect or not. Whatever we do, whether we do nothing or whether we strike or bomb tons more than we are, I don't think that's going to have an appreciable effect on how
I think it definitely will. Like, don't get me wrong, them taking child soldiers is fucking disgraceful. Obviously, I mean that's
sure. But my point with that is that they're radicalizing them and they're
we can't necessarily stop them from necessarily doing that. But what you do is by bombing countries, and again, it goes back to the point I made in my opening statement about the silly, not uneducated, but let's just say silly response of Western governments to go to bombing as a kind of almost a kind of reflex response to so many situations creates problems down the line. And so if we're just going to kick the extremism can down the road for every single generation, you just end up with constant extremism all over the place.
I'm just wondering which one, like, I'm out of all of these scenarios
before you do that, $5 from 𝕾𝖎𝖙 to ask Kevin Logan how you remove Hamas from the government without disarming them.
Well, you would have to disarm them to some extent, yeah. And to be fair, I think there are ways. Some of what Israel has done in the Gaza Strip has degraded Hamas's ability to wage war. It's just the fact that they've also destroyed the Palestinian parliament building in Gaza City. The fact that they destroyed the university buildings. This is obviously a kind of ethnic displacement is what's taking place.
They've also created untold numbers of fucking Hamas recruits by killing over 20,000 fucking people.
Well, that's what I mean. That's precisely the example, or precisely the point I was making there, is that by bombing as a kind of reflex response to these things, you end up creating much bigger problems down the line. Because if you bomb Yemen, you create the perfect breeding ground for more Houthis and people and groups like that to arise. It happened in Iraq, it happened in Afghanistan, it's happening now in Gaza. The people in Gaza, their support for Hamas has vastly increased since this started. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Okay, this is what happens. It radicalizes people when you drop bombs on them.
I want to pass it to Rashad real quick, and then we can go to you, perspective philosophy. So Rashad, then perspective philosophy, and then we'll do Nonsmoker, and that's the order we're going to go in. Go ahead.
I mean, if I recall correctly, in Iraq, we bombed the shit out of ISIS in Mosul. I believe in Iraq in 2004, when Al-Qaeda in Iraq took over the city of Fallujah, we bombed the shit out of it before we Marine or army soldier inside that city. Bombing is going to have to occur, and civilians are going to die. The question is, what were you going to say?
No, my point was that our initial bombing of Iraq and the power vacuum that led, and indeed in Syria, led to the creation of ISIS as an entity in that region in the first place.
But we're already here. We've arrived. Hamas is here. So, the Houthis are here. What do you suggest we do if not direct action? They
not
have
make it worse.
Well, let him finish. Let him finish, and then we can get into it.
I like it. civilians are going to die, and these ideologies are very, very dependent upon and thrive on victimization. They thrive on, we attack you, we can't really beat you, and you have to bomb us, you have to shoot up buildings, you have to do all of this. You will kill our civilians, which will further radicalize our civilians. It's a loop that we cannot avoid. At some point, we will have to directly engage them. And in Iraq, ISIS has been decapitated for the most part. They still exist, but they are nowhere near what they used to be. And that came from direct action, direct violence, a siege on the city, bombing, direct contact, all of that. This has to happen.
Can I just point out, it's very easy to say civilians are going to die when you're not one of those civilians, right?
Can we remind us how many civilians have died in the recent Biden strikes on Yemen?
And Yemen, as far as I'm aware, none. But we were talking about Iraq. But
I just want to.
My point. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. And by the way, actually, to link that back to Israel, the fact that the Biden strikes have seemingly killed no civilians is an example of how you can do targeted strikes in a way that Israel clearly is not doing targeted strikes.
That is crazy. That is crazy. That is so dishonest. It's absolutely insane.
You can't just say like who was the guy that did the opening statement before who like donated?
Artemis Fowl.
Well, didn't he donate and essentially explain to you why the situation's radically different? Because we're talking about military infrastructure away from civilian infrastructure, where with Hamas it's military infrastructure beneath.
But Israel
within,
has literally cleared out civilian areas and flattened houses and university buildings and the
because they would have to go building by building to clear them. Do you know how
had no people in them? They were empty.
There's weapons in them. There's weapons caches in these buildings.
Oh, for fuck's sake! Yeah, there's tunnels under every fucking building in Palestine. Jesus Christ!
Are there not? Are you arguing that there's no tunnels and no weapons caches? And
no. I'm arguing that there's not tunnels under everything in Gaza, and yet they seem to be flattening everything in Gaza.
I'm happy to say that Israel should be held to account the fact that it's probably trying to expand its control of the region, right? Like that sounds like Israel. That's what Israel does, right? Like I'm not surprised, right? Like Israel, like Netanyahu will, and like the government will use every really advantage it can take from this scenario, which was essentially developed because of the attacks. They played right into their hands in many ways. But the situation is such that I do think that okay, we'll pull Israel's reins. Yeah, maybe that would be a good idea. I definitely agree with that. But what we're really saying is, when we're talking about what is the Houthis, right, and the strikes on the Houthis, right, it doesn't make sense to compare the Houthis with Hamas and the strikes that Israel's doing with the strikes that the United States is doing, which is essentially just to protect global shipping and a tit-for-tat strike, such that it is taking out important military infrastructure and preventing these attacks from happening further. You can't make these it's apples and oranges, man. Like it's like
remotely apples and oranges. The way that Israel has gone about this has been the opposite of targeted strikes. That's it. That's just a fact.
It's a dense area with civilian infrastructure being used as staging grounds for combat. We did the same thing in Fallujah.
All of it. All of that's happened. Yeah. All of the buildings that have been targeted have all been Hamas.
But you're missing what was being said. Like you said this in the first place by saying that we shouldn't strike the Houthis because it's going to radicalize them, right? But what we're saying is that if civilians haven't died, and you're saying, but in one case 20,000 civilians have died, and in the
there's
other
no
case,
reason to assume no civilians are going to die if we continue striking. We're saying they haven't died yet.
Yeah,
so
okay, but
if civilians do die, then that's the same amount.
The difference, man, in terms of the military infrastructure, you talk. It's like
no, I agree. I see your point. I'm just saying that there's no reason to assume that if we continue striking, that we're not going to eventually kill fucking civilians, and we're still attacking this region.
Also, you don't even have to necessarily kill civilians to radicalize people.
Exactly.
You give a propaganda tool to the Houthis to say,
you're
look,
carrying out hostile action against the sovereign
propaganda.
One at a time. Let's toss it to Rashad, and then we'll go to Nonsmoker, and yeah.
All the more reason to strike. I mean, when you said it's easy to say civilians are going to die when you're not one of those civilians. In World War II, we bombed the shit out of Axis cities. Would you condemn the bombing of Dresden? Do you have any any quarrels with any of those acts in World War II? Would you like to
No,
name?
I would
do you have
argue-
any
no,
discrepancies?
I would
Any
argue
Not
that-
World War
complaints?
II, dude.
Any negative
I would
Yelp reviews
argue-
you want to make?
You want to
about
talk?
that?
You want to talk apples and oranges? The Luftwaffe flattened sections of British cities, and we responded. Houthis have, as far as I'm aware, not done a blitz on anyone.
Oh my god! The question is, you're basically sitting here saying civilian deaths is like your line in the sand for conflict. I'm asking.
No, it is. No. I didn't say that. I literally
That's
just
basically
said
what you've
you
been-
don't need to kill civilians in order to potentially radicalize people. I literally
When
just
we were
said that.
talking about the bombing of Gaza, you basically said that the civilian deaths were like a line in the sand for Israel. Like, oh, they're killing all these civilians. I told you, civilian deaths are a part of war. And you basically sat there and said it's easy. You literally said it's easy to say civilians are going to die when you're
Yeah,
not.
I'm
one.
saying
telling you,
it's if your city was being bombed, I think you might have a slightly different opinion on this. Yeah,
Yeah, but we're talking about
that's
a
the point I'm
world
making.
perspective on this conflict. We're not talking about being a literal Palestinian. We are not Palestine. I don't know if any of you guys are. Feel free to name it. We're talking from an American or European or NATO perspective. You do have
because
to have.
you're safe.
Can I-
You're
can
not
I
being bombed. That's the
No,
point.
what about
Rashad.
our interests don't matter?
Rashad,
No, I'm not
everybody
saying
knows.
that. I'm saying
Everybody
it's very
agrees.
easy to be blasé
Wait, hold on.
when it's not
Hold
you
on.
being killed.
Everybody agrees civilians are going to die in war. I guess what I'm arguing is, should we engage in like an act of warfare in this region? Is that the best way to resolve this? Like, I agree with you that civilians will die no matter what at some point. The whole notion, this very liberal notion of like, well, we can do nice missile strikes, which will only hit things that really we want to take out, and everybody else that is innocent will be fine. I don't think that's realistic, especially the more strikes we carry out. It becomes
that's just
increasingly less
vile.
realistic.
That's just vile. Look, of course, there's a difference between hitting military infrastructure than like directly attacking apartment buildings. Of course, there's a difference. Like, if we can't avoid killing civilians en masse,
No,
I think
look,
that you actually have a moral obligation.
Of course,
to
it's not as
kill.
bad as what Israel's doing. I agree with you. What I'm saying is that inevitably, we're probably going to kill an innocent fucking person. It's
Yeah.
probably going to happen.
Yeah, it's
So,
very likely.
to your point, Rashad, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Will we get enough juice out of the squeeze to justify killing a bunch of innocent people? And you seem to think it is, right? And Kevin's saying, well, it's easy for you to say because your life is not on the line, right? What I'm arguing is that maybe we can resolve this without killing any innocent fucking people. And I know that you guys don't see the connection as clearly as I do, but I think if we can do something to resolve this fucking genocide in Gaza, it'll stop these fucking strikes and these commercial shipping vessels.
I think you're seeing things that aren't there. That's why.
Two things, please. Oh my God. Two things before we continue. $22 from Artemis Val to say this. Ukraine used every house and home as a bunker until it became rubble and held out to defend itself from Russia. If Hamas is trying to defend Gaza, why do you find it so hard to believe they have used buildings as firing points? Thank you for the money.
I've not
said
that, but if you want to compare Vladimir Putin and his invasion of Ukraine to the Israeli government and their invasion of Gaza, by all means, have at it. I don't think you win that argument particularly.
Fair enough. The second thing I would ask to non-smoker specifically, right? Because you keep talking about using diplomacy, negotiating with to cut off aid to Israel and lift sanctions, etc. Say we do that. Say we go in, right? We do everything you just said. We cut off aid to Israel. We certainly rebuke them, right? Like we support the ICJ's court case going through right now about is Israel doing a genocide. We lift the sanctions from the Houthis, etc. And they're still attacking shipping. What do we do then?
Attack them.
Okay, so at that point,
I'm so
that would
confident.
be your okay.
I'm so confident that would stop these strikes that I'm willing to say, yes, I 100% support attacking the Houthis if the strikes continue after we've lifted sanctions and after a two-state solution has been reached with our diplomatic assistance.
Okay.
Just don't understand how you're not.
I think that's pie in the sky, to be honest.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. I think it's like in the sense that you said, you don't think that we see the connection such as that you see it. I think you see things that aren't there, right? I think you're fucking tripping balls, mate. Like, I think that in reality, what we'll have is a situation in which if you relieve essentially the economic pressures, you'll see a buildup of military surplus and an increasingly radicalized population who will actually want to fight. Like, it's not like, and don't get me wrong, do I think that I don't like the way that global sanctions work? I don't like the way that this economic system is necessarily structured, and I think that we clearly need to make essentially greater avenues for, let's say, approved structures of payment for non-military equipment and ease of logistics in terms of the region, and that would actually aid. I'm not a materialist like Marxist, but I do think that would help because I think people's ideology is also tied to the meeting, right? Sure, 100%, do what you can, but I think it's a bit utopian to go. And then because we've done that, and I think this is the typical Marxist failure, is to place it all in terms of material interest and not see the ideological connections. And even if you look at it from a commodity fetishism point of view, like how they view themselves in terms of the object is such that their identity is only going to be affirmed in the conflict. Like that's part, in terms of the Houthis and their actual identity, what they're affirming is anti-Western, anti-Jew, anti-American, and it's essentially they are defined by their negation of our identity. So it's just not going to stop happening. Like their identity is just not going to disappear into the abyss just because you give them greater access to material.
I think a big part the part of the connection, I feel like maybe I'm not articulating it clearly enough. It's giving the Houthis a moral case to carry this out. So you have to understand, if you're the Houthis doing this sort of attack, right, there has to be something that you stand to gain from it. It's not just random violence, right? And there also has to be, knowing that they're going to incur a tremendous amount of risk, right? They're going to be obviously met with some sort of military resistance in all likelihood. There has to be a reason why they think they can pull this off, and they think that at least someone in this, international community, to whatever extent that even exists, would support them, right? And they have this moral case that, yeah, we're doing this to stand up for the Palestinians. Is that bullshit? Yeah, probably, but it's still at least part of the reason. You're taking away part of the moral justification for what they're doing by helping resolve that conflict, and you remove sanctions, so you help them meet their bottom line, and the fucking strikes will stop.
It's called an excuse, is what it is.
That's fine. You take away the excuse then.
But even if you take away the excuse, you're just talking about an essentially trying to undermine an effective propaganda campaign, and I don't think
so
that
you lift. Listen, their propaganda campaign's their own fucking problem. Their propaganda campaign's their own fucking problem, and on top of that,
I'd like them to take away the excuse and give Palestine a state. Yeah, that'd be cool. But I don't think it would make any impact on the situation in Yemen.
Okay.
Well, I think you're wrong. Okay,
I got a couple super chats. Going to read them real quick. But before I get to your super chats, and I see you, and thank you for the money, I do want to give a chance for Rashad to get in here. I know he has a unique stance on this. He seems almost 1v3ing the panel here, but that's okay. Rashad, give us what you got. We're gonna give you some space here, some time, and then I'm gonna read these super chats because one's for you, Logan, and one's for you, Nonsmoker. So
Artemis Fowl, hello.
Yes, he is financing my channel. But anyway, go ahead, Rashad. Give us what you got.
I think that making any concessions to the Houthis right now would only serve to embolden both them and Hamas. I think that their ideologies are just too radical, too wild, and I think that they will perceive any concession as weakness where weakness does not exist. I think that how extreme and how insane they are in trying to play games with the U.S. military is a symbol enough of how delusional they are. And I think that for the sake of global security, you could call it American global hegemony, you can say that America has no benevolent care for the people in the region, whatever you want. It serves the best interest of the world economically, and it serves the world order for us to not, feed into these terrorist organizations, not to give them strength, to decapitate them, to destroy them, and to rid them from the world stage, or at least disarm them enough to where they cannot participate. The Houthis are obviously a proxy for Iran. Whether they're like the puppets of Iran is another story, but they are definitely acting in Iran's interest. They're definitely using probably, Iranian provided weaponry. It is in our best interest to defang Iran's proxies, make Iran basically powerless on the world stage for the sake of global, security and economic security. I see zero benefit to, give a two-state solution within a year of October 7th. I see zero benefit for lifting the sanctions on an organization like the Houthis. The only response in this situation that I think is appropriate is force. That's just my opinion.
Can I just say, like, I think that it's fair to say that a two-state solution might be well and good, and I do actually support a two-state solution. I think a year is a little bit hopeful, though. I think that you can't just go like this. I mean, the two-state solution has been like a constant like negotiate. Like they've been at the negotiating table many times to try and resolve this and try and zone off the areas and create a two-state solution. So like just go make one in a year, otherwise all of the funding's gone is just like, and it's not going to
18
happen.
months.
You could 18 months. What you're doing is you're asking for.
Dude,
like,
I'm just picking a random slice of
Yeah,
time.
that's
It
the
doesn't have to be a
problem.
year.
It's
Be 2
arbitrary.
years.
It's
That makes you
arbitrary.
sleep better at night.
It's
You can add more
arbitrary.
years if you want.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can add as long as you want on, but it's not just the Israelis that get to decide who's going to accept the two-state solution, as we've seen in the prior.
No, but I
rejection.
think you agree that if you mentioned multiple times already reining Israel in, they're highly dependent on U.S. support for their very existence. Of
I think-
course, if we threaten to withdraw funding, or of course, if we even threaten to reduce funding, they would fucking come to the negotiating table with a much different attitude.
I agree. I don't disagree with that, but I think there's a difference between saying that and also meet these conditions, otherwise funding will be withdrawn. What we say is like, I want to see some real diplomacy going on here, otherwise we'll withdraw funding, and I think that's fair enough.
Well, I just don't think it's sufficient to say, well, we're really serious about this. You better solve that, and you know, being firmer and saying, look, there needs to be a realistic deadline here. There needs to be a realistic expectation from us. We could even draw up like a 5-point, 10-point peace plan and say, you know, why don't you consider this in the negotiating process? Something, show some attempt at diplomacy.
Be a
Right
good
now, there's
communist
none.
in a 5-year plan, like you know, it's just like
I mean, is
Okay.
there a slice of time you would prefer?
Okay.
I'm just saying it's not something that we can
Before we
put in.
Give me
before
a
we go,
time,
we're,
dude.
We're circling on this. Let's get to those super chats because I want to make my money. $20 for Logan. Well, $20 for me to ask Logan. Let's be clear. Logan, since you are advocating for just intercepting missiles instead of bombing Houthi missile sites, would you allow Ireland to be taken over by literal Nazis and allow them to attack local shipping vessels?
We can't hear him.
Yeah, we
I don't
can't
think
hear you,
can hear him.
brother.
You might want to.
Uh-oh.
You might be muted.
He's not muted on my end.
Yeah, I don't think he's muted either, but we can't hear him. I don't see the mute symbol.
Your audio's gone, dude.
That's the funniest question I've ever heard in my fucking life, by the way.
Don't worry, you got a question coming up. Okay, well, he's dealing with his audio issues. Work on it. Hopefully we'll get to it. We'll get to your question first, Nonsmoker. Nonsmoker, would you allow the Nazis to dictate... I don't know why you only got $10 and he got $20. Whatever. Would you allow the Nazis to dictate a two-state solution in Germany, allowing the AfD to take power and negotiate with them in order to resolve the problem?
What dumbass asked this question?
Artemis Fowl.
Oh, okay. Emphasis on foul. No.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Oh, this is actually really bad. Kevin Logan, can you hear us? Okay. Well, the show must go on. Hopefully he gets that fixed. I don't know what's wrong with it. But just keep trying, Kevin, and we'll try to get you back in here. We got about 25 more minutes left in the program, so hopefully we can get you to have your closing thoughts, closing statements, etc. But we still got a lot of ways to go for this. I guess my question would be, right? I know, to Rashad's point, Rashad talked about emboldening them to continue to act this way, right? Does not giving them what they want in this instance, giving the Houthis all these concessions, just mean that the next time that there is a conflict or that there is something that is going on the world stage, that they will just use the same tactic again to get what they want? It worked the first time. Why wouldn't it work now? Does this just not again? Isn't this just kicking the can down the road on that?
Well, we've interfered in many places in the world with the objective being like, well, you know, we've drawn this line in the sand and you've crossed it. And if we don't do something now, then, you know, you're just going to be emboldened to keep continuing. And ironically, what's happened is we've responded with military force, and yet strikes against our, hegemonic control over the world have just continued. I think the reality is that like violence between states is kind of like an inevitability. and countries are going to do things we don't like. And it's about managing and mitigating the damage. And, listen, I'm not such a peacenik that I don't think that sometimes you need to use military force, especially if it's like, our national defense, right? But I happen to think that, you use it with an extreme amount of discretion. And this doesn't feel like an extreme amount of discretion. And, to the idea that, like, if we don't do X, Y, and Z, it'll embolden the Houthis, I actually think carrying out strikes will embolden the Houthis far more than any kind of, like, diplomatic efforts on our part might.
Oh, Kevin.
We still
Still
can't
can't
hear
hear
him.
you, mate. We still can't
Kevin.
hear you.
Do you have push to talk enabled? Did it enable? Did you
Yeah,
switch? Did you switch mics somehow?
His camera turned off for a little bit.
It
Then
did.
he came back, and then we couldn't hear him after that.
Like your default audio device, it might have changed
Yeah,
on.
that might. Yeah.
You know what? Maybe Biden struck his Ethernet cable.
He's been
and
taken
it's
out
like
by the CIA, man.
CIA's
Yeah.
got him. Okay.
Digital
yeah.
branding. Let's go.
I mean, was this justified? Was this a justified strike? I don't know. It's affecting my bottom line. That's all I got to say. And I'm not okay with that. I guess the Steelman, since Nonsmoker's missing his ally here, I'll Steelman this a little bit, like to Rashad, right? Biden himself has said that the strikes aren't working. They're not working, right? So we're spending all this money, all this time and this effort for something that's not going to change the actual outcome of things. They're just going to keep attacking us, right? So why give them the ability to just drain our resources like that? Wouldn't it be wiser strategically just to either let other countries handle it, right? Like let Egypt handle it, let Saudis handle it, let China even handle it, right? Because eventually this is going to affect China's bottom line too. Or just simply say, okay, well, we're just getting out of the Middle East entirely, right? Well, what's the difference there?
Well, the suggestion that other nations could handle it suggested it could be handled. So I would recommend more aggression. I would recommend figuring out why is it not working? Are there any holes in our game? I would argue that it's just in our best interest to keep striking them. I don't think that making concessions at any point in time to the Houthis and giving them room to breathe or giving them a reason to think that if we just do whatever we want to do, we can get whatever we want in exchange. I don't think that's necessarily a fair strategy. I don't think that our actions are having little effect. I think Maersk at one point was not moving ships down the Suez Canal, and they decided to go down after we started protecting those ships. So at the end of the day, it's having a positive effect. I mean, we could just sit there and leave it there and do nothing. Or we could offer them a deal and have them be emboldened by being able to realize that terrorist acts can get them what they want. But the point being is that if they're going to escalate this conflict, they're going to take Israel-Palestine and turn it into a regional conflict or maybe even a global conflict. They can't be given concessions. We got to look at the context of their ideology. These are irrational actors on the global stage, and I don't think they should be given any sort of room to continue to have any ability to affect anything going on.
Wait, can I just ask a follow-up? I know Perspective Philosophy wants to say something, but can I ask follow-up real quick? So look, so we've already mentioned no civilians have died. I happen to think strikes continue, civilians probably will die. You seem to be perfectly okay with that. Correct. So, okay, my question to you would be, is there a number at which you would cut things off and you would say, okay, now I'm no longer okay with this. We've killed too many civilians. The impact of this is too much. It's obviously not working. Like, how many civilians would you accept dying? 100, 1,000?
I mean, that's a ridiculous question. Like, do you think the number's going to go up to 1 million? Like, in the
No,
real
well,
scenario,
is there a number? Is there a number?
That's just a ridiculous question.
So no
Like,
number.
is there a number?
So no
Is there a
number?
number is a ridiculous question. Civilians are going to
So
die.
no number.
Like,
okay.
What's your point? Like,
No,
what is the
nothing.
point that you're trying to make?
You've made my point
what
for me.
So
I
what
think
about
to be
civilians
the
who are receiving-
philosopher,
how many civilians suffering from not receiving their goods is fine with you? What
well,
number?
I was going to say, like,
Oh no, the
what
Amazon
number?
deliveries. Who?
What
Just think of the
number?
Amazon
What
deliveries.
number? What number of people in the region not receiving their goods?
More than the number of
is okay with
civilians.
you?
More than
Excuse
the
me?
number of civilians. More than the number of civilians.
Okay, so you're fine with civilians being impacted negatively, even if it could cause death. You have no number on that either.
I would need to see how it's causing death.
So,
Well,
like,
so you have
increasing,
stipulations for how far
increasing
you're willing
costs
to
of
go.
medication, increasing costs of
Do
food.
you guys
increasing
think
costs of
that the
energy.
Houthis carrying out a few strikes on shipping vessels is going to stop people from
Massively.
getting medications throughout
It
the whole
will
world
add,
to an
it could-
extent that it'll kill people?
Yes.
I mean,
Specifically the lower classes, yes.
based on what?
Based upon the fact that, do you think that they can, right, when you look at how shipping...
Is
in
there a
all of this
medication
works-
shortage right now?
Well, there actually is for certain medications, yeah. I mean, it's
Due
specifically
to
in the
this?
UK. No, not due to this. No, like,
Oh,
but
okay.
in general.
So there
like, yeah.
isn't. So not related to this at all.
Well, because
so
this
let's
hasn't
just
even
wait until there
progressed to the
is.
point in
Let's
which
just
it's a
wait until there
genuine,
is.
like, we're talking about increasing economic strife around the world. That's what global shipping's supporting. We're talking about increasing prices.
Dude,
the
I think
cost of
this
global
whole
shipping
debate,
massively.
you've been exaggerating the economic strife that will come as a result of this. By
I've
like
seen,
a
I've seen
tremendous
estimates
amount.
of up to 20% increases on shipping of certain goods, man. That's a considerable, that can price people out, no problem.
I think that a 20% increase in the price of goods overall would have a devastating economic impact on
Yeah.
people. I don't think we're anywhere near that fucking level yet.
No, because
And,
we bombed them.
and the estimates of that are reliant on what? I mean, what are
We're
the
fucking
assumptions
blowing
built into
them
those
up.
estimates? Whose estimate?
We're
the-
blowing
the-
them up. That's why it's not getting that out of hand. Unless you just want to give them the green light to just go as far as they want. Then
I
what? Let's
disagree,
agree on
dude.
it.
The strikes
estimates
have
are
not
built-
stopped.
they-
The strikes on shipping
they've
vessels,
slowed
at
down.
least
They
not for
actually
any
have slowed
significant
down.
amount of time.
They have slowed down.
They've slowed down.
significantly.
They haven't stopped.
Yeah, but you're not going to stop them like overnight. And that's the whole.
You're not
that's
going to
Biden's
stop them.
point.
Period. They're going to fucking keep
Well, even
happening.
if but it's about taking away like the majority of the strikes, such that it's easier and more cost effective to deal with them, such that we can maintain shipping in that area rather than having to go around Cape Hope. So like the whole point is who's willing to actually take the risk. Like we had a drop. I think it was like a 65% drop in shipping in the area at one point. So like when you talk about like the its effect on the shipping in that region, and like I mean, I don't know if the world's pretty big, man. Actually not going through that area and instead going round South Africa massively increases costs. So it's not like I'm exaggerating and it's like, oh, this is a real issue.
I'll say this, that if there's a 20% increase in the cost of goods across the board for everybody in the world, but it ends up leading to a peaceful resolution in Gaza somehow, I'm totally fine with that.
I mean, like you're just like you're robbing
Like
Peter
100%.
to pay Paul, man, and like
I'm
I
fine
think
with that. Fuck Peter.
Well, I don't,
I mean,
I
Peter's
think
not
that-
just the United States or Israel; it's the rest of the world being
it's the
economically.
entire world, yeah.
Thousands
you
of
talking
fucking
about?
civilians are dying. I'm totally fine with that.
I no, but look, we've talked about this before about how it's very possible that we could rein in like the Houthi strikes. Not thousands of people aren't dying. What we're talking about is Hamas and Israel, which we can talk about. There's other geopolitical mechanisms we can use to essentially try and calm things down there.
Right.
I
You
agree
don't see
there.
the connection.
But
I get it.
no, I see that you want to think of this as the Houthis are doing this only in order to embolden themselves and create like a pathetic geopolitical axis among regional powers, which will not actually be able to challenge American and Israeli hegemony in the area, right? But in reality, I see this as the influence of Iran and a larger Middle East strategy. Because the reality is that they don't care. Like, if you're thinking about who's your allies on the battlefield, the Palestinian people aren't the people that I want on side. I want the people who actually have a military industry that can support me long term. So, like, no, I don't think that we should look at it like, oh, the Houthis are trying to get the Palestinians on side for when this conflict ends. That's fucking ludicrous. That's like that ironically is the dumbest materialist take ever. Like, what is their material interest?
I'm gonna
in
have
that
to let him
scenario?
respond to that. Non-smoker, go ahead. Dumbest material take ever.
It's the
Thoughts?
dumbest materialist take ever that the Houthis want to have some sort of alignment with an axis of resistance. That's the dumbest take ever because it's not even mine.
That doing it precisely for that reason, rather than to, let's say, have a broader relationship with a larger, more influential power in the region,
Meaning Iran.
meaning Iran.
I think Iran's part of this axis of resistance.
I don't think that Iran is an axis of resistance. I think that gives Iran that Iran supports what you might call the axis of resistance in the area to put pressure on Israel and the United States. But I think that it's doing it for its own geopolitical purposes. Like you're letting the tail wag the dog there.
Yeah, look, this is not a view that I hold on my own, and it's certainly not one that I derive out of like some sort of blind adherence to materialism. This is the opinion of many scholars on the topic. I mean, I have to look at my notes. I hate to be that guy, but like
No, that's
Lindsay
fine.
Cohn, National Security Affairs professor at the U.S. Naval War College, Middle East Institute's Charles Lister. A lot of these people, this notion that there's an axis of resistance forming in the Middle East in opposition to the West, and this is, you know, the beginning stages of that, is not something that I'm pulling out of thin air.
I didn't disagree with that. I said
so-
that this would end, like the hypothesis is that this is being done only to embolden essentially an axis of resistance between the Palestinian people and the Houthis, when in reality the axis of resistance that you're talking about is coming from Iran, and larger political, and even Hezbollah is far more important than the Palestinians. Let's look at the actual powerful
wait,
actors
I
in the
think I
region.
see. Okay, no, I think I see where the misunderstanding's happening. What I'm arguing is that this is emboldening this axis of resistance. On the one hand, the Palestinian issue, I think, gives them the moral case for doing this, right? They can use that as an excuse. And I'm fine with saying that it's an excuse and that there's no other utility in doing that. I'm saying take the excuse away. But in terms of the Axis resistance being emboldened, the Houthis view this as an opportunity to be seen as a legitimate power, right? Like, hey, we, through our military action, can to some extent dictate an outcome that's more favorable for, you know, this sympathetic cause, right? Or we can use it to dictate an outcome which is more, you know, favorable to us in general, right? Like they view it as something that will make them seen as more legitimate. Now, I get the logic of, okay, we should carry out strikes and not bend to their will because then they won't be seen as legitimate. But I actually think, ironically, carrying out strikes will make them be seen as more legitimate by the people of Yemen because of the possible civilian cost, right? And it also makes them look like this sympathetic case where this big power is beating up on them, right? So I do think it's a different, yeah.
I would 100% concede that the way that Israel's engaging in war in Palestine is leading to an ideological alignment between various actors in that region. And that's bad. We shouldn't be doing that. Even from a tactical perspective, it's bad for Israel, right? And I actually know a guy who's like US military intelligence, so he's ex-US military intelligence, and even he was saying that. He's like, actually, the way they're engaging in this conflict isn't in their interests. We wouldn't be doing it this way. So, like, fair enough. But when we compare that to the strikes on the Houthis, right, which I understand they're connected, but we've already said there's mechanisms we can use to essentially try to pull Israel back. But in terms of the strikes on the Houthis, it will genuinely legitimize them as an influential regional power if they're able to disrupt global shipping and go unimpeded.
I wanted to. I'll let you respond to that, but then I want to give. I want to toss the ball to Rashad, let him respond, and then we'll get to closings. So.
Oh, coming to me now?
No, you can respond to that, Smoker, is what I'm saying.
Oh,
my
mistake.
We'll pass,
yeah.
After your response, we'll pass the ball to Rashad, and then we'll go into closings.
Yeah, I think I'm actually willing to concede the idea that allowing this to happen unimpeded, as you put it, might be problematic. I just don't see the utility in carrying out military strikes to a greater extent, I think, than has already happened, given the fact that I think eventually you're going to incur civilian deaths, civilian casualties, which will only embolden the Houthis, at least locally in Yemen, right? And I think it will embolden this axis of resistance to say, hey, there's this big world power beating up on us, right? If we could say, like, all right, we've carried out this amount of strikes, no civilians have died, and the Houthis stopped, then I would actually be fine with it. I just don't think that that's what's playing out in reality or will play out in reality. So I happen to think that we're going to have to place a really heavy emphasis on diplomacy here to at least remove the moral case, the moral imperative, right? And then if the Houthis continue striking or there's, continues to be some sort of clashing of interests there, we might have to respond with military force. I also think we can engage in diplomacy with the Houthis. And will that grant them some level of legitimacy? I think at this point, that's kind of unavoidable, is my point. They're either going to be seen as legitimate by us or seen as legitimate by this axis of resistance, or both, right? Either way, I think that they're approaching legitimacy one way or another, because the reality on the ground in Yemen is they're the only stable force there, right? Since the collapse of the government.
I want to toss it to Rashad. to respond to all of this,
Um,
and then yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the emboldening argument to me is kind of pointless. I mean, all of these organizations, they're all batshit crazy. Let's just keep it a stack. Like, all of them are insane. Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah. I mean, they're all high on their own supply. They're irrational. They're completely obsessed with their ideologies beyond like any sort of genuine, realistic geopolitical aims or goals. I don't think conceding to them makes any sense. And, you know, we could have used the same argument for ISIS. Look, there's a lot of civilian support. If we blow up ISIS, who are around a lot of civilians, it could radicalize even more Iraqis. I mean, we could extend this argument as far as we want. These ideologies feed off of victimhood mentality. And the reality is, if we concede to them, I would argue it would give even more legitimacy. It would give them even more boldness to strike. And I would have to ask you, I mean, how many civilian people on these cargo ships are worth, in your mind, you know, the sacrifice? I mean, like, how is it right to expose them to a conflict they have absolutely nothing to do with? If the Houthis want to if they want to put themselves in a conflict that has really nothing to do with them outside of religious brotherhood with the Palestinians, you know, I feel no sympathy for who those strikes hit. Zero.
I mean, I do want to point out the fact that, like, ISIS came out of directly came as a result of U.S. military intervention in Iraq. Like, there would have been no ISIS had we not destabilized the region.
All the more reason, though, to your argument, all the more reason to your argument of, hey, you know, these people have been radicalized by this U.S. intervention. If we, you know, strike them even more, it'll embolden them and rile them up even more. I mean, we could just sit there and say, hey, look, if we look at the history of how they came about and the morality of it, why not just concede to them, make some concessions, see if we can be diplomatic with them? I mean, look at the root of their argument. I mean, it's kind of moral. We could sit there and give ISIS the same little breathing room and wiggle room to wild out too. Why not?
I'm not sure I really follow. So you're saying that you think that we should do that with the Houthis, or you're saying that the reason we shouldn't do that with the Houthis is because hypothetically you could make the same case for ISIS? I mean, I don't think you can necessarily make the same case for ISIS. Like, ISIS is operating as like this rogue entity that came about as, or in the capacity that they really even still operate, as a result of our direct interference in that region. You know, it's like probably the best case for us not interfering anymore.
I mean, that's a little bit unfair. Like, that's a little bit unfair. Like, look, I'm not really a fan of Iraq and Afghanistan as wars, but I think it's a little bit unfair to say that it's only because of the power vacuum that was from the United States. Because I mean, it is in one respect, but the alternative was to let the Saddam government essentially continue and invade its neighbors and commit the horrible shit.
Iraq wasn't invading its neighbors in 2003.
No, Iraq invaded its neighbor, like when the Americans like airstriked and
in the early 90s. We're talking 2003 when we overthrew Saddam.
Yeah, but I mean, in general, I don't disagree. I'm just saying that the Iraqi government isn't one that was essentially a good faith.
We don't know. The Iraqi government is lame and nobody likes them, blah, blah, blah. But the idea that overthrowing them because we don't like them led to anything other than the creation of fucking ISIS and the total destabilization of that region and hundreds of thousands of fucking people dying.
I don't agree with the Iraq war. I'm just saying it's not a fair characterization to say that ISIS
Well, it sounds almost like you're saying that it was worth it to get rid of Saddam, and
no,
what I'm suggesting
saying
is that
it's not. No, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the only reason that ISIS didn't develop in the region is because Saddam's use of force essentially crushed the resistance, like the development.
Which would have been better for everyone.
In some respects, yeah, and I mean, like, I'm not, as I say, I'm not.
Gassed, but you know,
yeah, like the million.
No, I'm not defending Saddam gassing anyone. What I'm saying though is that it prevents the creation of ISIS. Doesn't that help everybody?
Well, yeah, but I mean,
not the gassing specifically, him being president.
I was gonna say it's like we're looking at essentially horrific scenarios on either side, and I don't think that the American intervention in the Iraq was a good intervention, right?
I think it was far worse than Saddam being the leader there.
I think it largely had to do with our political interest in the region. I'll say that, like, so, and I think that it ended up playing out to be pretty bad, especially for like when we look at how it spun into Syria and how it created larger geopolitical destabilization. So yeah, I'm not happy with how Iraq was handled or done in the first place, and I mean, we can even go back further than this, and the mistake was essentially how that Iraqi government took power. Like, this is a long line of geopolitical failures on the part of like the hegemon. Like, yeah, sure, but I just think that it's not fair to say, okay, ISIS is literally the only resulted from American intervention. It wasn't only American intervention. Like the fact that you're talking about having to have essentially what is a militant dictatorship crushing local militias in order to prevent these from forming, and then that's the solution you're talking about, is having a essentially. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's not the better, maybe even the better option, I guess, but like, it's not as simple as it's America's fault. Actually, it's not America's fault. America killed one bad guy. They didn't necessarily cause the next one, like, de facto.
Gang, this has been a great discussion. I'm very sad that Kevin couldn't stay till the end. I'm sorry he had some technical difficulties. Gang, if you've enjoyed this content, if you've liked the show that I've put on today, gang, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Give me a follow if you're watching this on Twitch or on Kick. Consider gifting subs, consider super chatting, all that good thing. It helps me keep this channel going. It helps support me so I can keep streaming, so you can keep yelling at the screen when you disagree with some of my guests. But as to my guests, I want to just thank every single one of them for coming. I think this was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. And if you turn in tomorrow, you'll see Nonsmoker again and me. We're going on his channel, gang. I'll be streaming it too. And we are going to be debating this. On my side will be Destiny. Destiny is coming on. And then on his side, he will have 𝕬𝖎 the Great. I think that's how you say it. And it will be a 2-on-2 debate on the Houthis from a broad perspective. How did they form? Are they really freedom fighters? Are they the legitimate government? Should we recognize them as a legitimate government? Should we continue to have sanctions on them? A broad discussion. It will be great. It'll be fun. 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. I might go live a little early on that, but 7 p.m. Eastern, and tune in. Nonsmoker, give your outro, closing thoughts, and where people can find you. There's been some people asking me, and I don't know your Twitch handle exactly, so I want to make sure you give it so that people can find you. Go ahead.
Yeah, man. It's twitch.tv/non_smoker. All right. Twitch.tv/non_smoker. Yeah, happy to be here. It's good talking to everybody. If anybody's interested in a 1v1, right, please hit me up, right? But otherwise, I'll just say that, you know, and it actually goes into the last thing Perspective Philosophy was trying to argue there. While I don't think, maybe it's unfair to say groups like ISIS have only formed because of America's interference in the region, I think maybe it's totally fair to say that one of the major causes of ISIS's formation was America's interference in the region. I think history, the 21st century, the early part of it that we're in, and really the later part of the 20th century are just fucking littered with examples of cases where America has intervened in the affairs of another country and it's led to fucking disastrous results where everybody in that region fucking hates us. It's bad for the world, and that while I acknowledge we're a great world power and we shouldn't just seek to shrink ourselves into a corner and hide from everybody, and that being a great world power comes with this obligation, in a sense, to engage in conflicts here or there, I think we should do a much better job of mitigating them, reducing them, and trying our best to be, you know, a little bit nicer, right? And that would benefit everybody, including us. And including the American people who, you know, continue to pay assloads of their tax dollars to kill fucking brown babies all over the world. So I'm against that. And if you like my message, come follow me on Twitch. Thanks.
I shouted him out on my Twitch channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's non_smoker. Give him a follow. He's great. Thanks for coming, and thanks for hosting. Tomorrow it'll be a great discussion. But we have some more great guests that I need to give a chance to shout themselves out. And again, I want to stress, please give these guys a follow as well. Perspective of Philosophy, where can people find you, and what's your closing thoughts?
Yeah, so Perspective Philosophy on both YouTube and Twitch. I'd like to thank you, Wick, and Nonsmoker and Rashad for this conversation. I think it's been really great. So yeah, I guess my closing thoughts are primarily that obviously that this is an incredibly complex geopolitical situation that we're not going to solve in this panel. And I think that what we're doing is essentially outlining various, even just outlining the overall complexity of the situation, just in having this discussion, such that we can agree yet disagree so harshly on even individual actions, because it's a living history which involves countless decades of armed conflict in the region. It involves economics and it involves global politics. In terms of the arguments that have been given, I think that our intervention with the Houthis was necessary. I think that the Israeli attempts to crush Hamas have been drastic and ineffective in what the overall goal is. And I think that it is going to, and I think we need to show pity and mercy to the people of Palestine. And in terms of our geopolitical interests in the area, I think global shipping and economics need to be protected in order to prevent destabilization. I'm sounding like the materialist now. In order to prevent the destabilization of essentially the peace in locally and in the global community. So ultimately, the attacks on the Houthis were justified. I think that if we did have to consider, attacking civilian infrastructure, I think that we shouldn't do it. Let's say just bomb the shit out of them. I'm not just like, okay, we'll bomb them, how many bombs do we need to drop? Maybe then we'll change how we're engaging it. But I think, as Artemis Fowl said, I think it was at the start, essentially, this is an attack on military installations that have been largely effective and actually preventing the legitimization of a bad actor in the region. And also, and I'm happy to accept your offer, Nonsmoker, if you want to have a one-on-one. I'd love to do that. And I think it's, we should definitely understand that although the United States is the most powerful geopolitical actor, it is not the only one that's been overly involving itself in political strife and struggles around the world. And I can think of some very, very red examples which have been doing that throughout the 20th century.
Gang, give him a follow. We shouted him out in chat as well on my Twitch chat. Perspective Philosophy. Go support his channel. He's great. And yeah, if you guys do set up that one-on-one, let me know when, and I will tune in and watch and see what happens. Last but certainly, first of all, before I forget, Kevin Logan has a Twitch channel, and for reasons beyond his control, I hope beyond his control, he wasn't able to make it to the entire panel. But please, if you guys, I don't know his exact thing. I wish he was here to tell us. But search Kevin Logan on Twitch, and you'll find him. Follow him as well. Okay, that's it. Rashad, close us out. Where we can find you, and your closing thoughts on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube as Rashad Crenshaw. Don't look for my Twitter because I don't tweet. Yeah, I want to thank all of you guys, Nonsmoker, Perspective, Kevin Logan, and of course you, Wick, for having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys and fucking debate shit. And I was really nervous today. I wasn't sure how I was gonna do. So I want to thank you guys for giving like a civil environment and a respectful environment for us to just be able to talk and stuff like that. Obviously, you guys know my position. I think the West maintaining free and safe shipping for everybody is what's best for the global economy and for global security. And yeah, I think I've kind of beaten that horse dead enough times in the debate. So again, thank you for having me, and I'm just grateful to be here.
Okay. And with that, gang, we're going to raid out. Remember, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. We won't be on Twitch, and because we can't with Destiny on, but we will be on YouTube and we will be on Kick. So check us out. Okay, let's raid out. Are any of you going to continue to stream after this? No,
I am.
You
I
are?
am.
Okay, let's raid into Perspective
do that,
Philosophy.
Oh, thanks, man. I'm so tiny on Twitch. It's such a big deal for me. Thank you.
Of course, man. No worries. It's
Appreciate
not the
it.
size of the viewership that counts. It's who's watching you, right? So,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
yeah.
Let them know that this is a hate raid, though. It is a hate raid. So spam those emotes if you got them, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Later, guys.
Later, man.